Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Mike Lynch, the climate reporter for the Adirondack Explorer. Welcome to our panel discussion about electric vehicles and the region's charging network. During today's webinar, panelists will discuss both perceived and real barriers for driving electric vehicles in the Adirondack Park. Let's see. Including how the experience differs for locals and visitors. Currently, EV charging sites and stations have been built out mostly in the heavily trafficked regions of the park, the Northway, and tourist communities of Lake Placid, Saranac Lake, and Lake George. That has left a dearth of chargers in the smaller communities in the central, southern, and western parts of the park. So our panelists will discuss strategies for the next stages of EV charging development in the region. For the panel, we pick people who are familiar with driving EVs in the park and who bring different perspectives about this issue to the table. Today's panelists include Nancy Bernstein, who has been living with and promoting clean, renewable energy for nearly 30 years. She is an energy circuit rider for the Adirondack North Country Association and assists local governments to access funding for purchasing EVs and installing stations. Kristen Pouch, who has been with the town of Indian Lake as their economic development, marketing, and events manager since 2021. Indian Lake is a NYSERDA clean energy community and is working towards becoming a climate smart community. Christina has 19 years of nonprofit development and management experience in the Adirondacks. Pete Nelson is an historian, writer, and teacher who has been active in Adirondack issues. He is co-founder and board chair of the Adirondack Wilderness Advocates, board member of the Adirondack History Museum, and a co-founder of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative. He has been involved in promoting EVs and charging stations in the Adirondacks for several years. Jim McKenna is the former CEO of the Regional Office of Sustainable Tourism, Roost. He currently serves as CEO of the Uline Foundation, co-chair of the North Country Economic Development Council, and is a member of the Paul Smith College Board of Trustees. Okay, before we start, I have a few logistics to go over. We should have about 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A session. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to make sure they're addressed. This session is being recorded, and after the webinar, we'll be sharing a link to the recording on our website. Today, we're going to start with each panelist answering an individual question to give some background on their experience. Then we'll move into the discussion stage. We're going to start first with Nancy. Nancy, you work as an energy circuit rider for the Adirondack North Country Association. Could you describe your role in assisting communities in the Adirondacks in their efforts to obtain chargers? What are some of the challenges communities are facing when trying to obtain chargers?
Great, thanks, Mike, and thanks to the Explorer for hosting this forum. It's a great conversation to be having and to continue to have. Energy circuit riders were started in 2016, and that's when I started with ANCA. We provide technical assistance to local governments to implement energy efficiency and renewable energy measures that they see that their community needs. That might be making energy upgrades to one of their buildings, installing heat pumps in a building, converting streetlights to LED, or installing an EV charging station. We provide information on current federal, state, and utility energy programs, including things like eligibility requirements, application processes, submission deadlines. These grants are always changing. Opportunities are changing. They vary widely, depending on what program it is, and so keeping tabs on all that is really helpful. Can be helpful for our communities. There are a number of different EV charging station grants that are out there. They're at the federal level. There's still some that may still be available through the NEVI program. At the New York State, there's Charge Ready New York. There's also the Municipal Zero Emission Vehicle, or ZEV, grant, infrastructure grant. And then the various utilities, public utilities, have make-ready programs for behind-the-meter upgrades. But communities face a number of challenges to putting in EV charging stations. Like I said, the grants vary widely. Some have windows that open and close and deadlines, and others are rolling, and they vary a lot. So it's helpful for us to kind of help weed through a lot of that, to get to what might work for each community. It's challenging to navigate different contractors, different equipment, and networks for charging stations, the types of chargers, and then suitable locations that work for the municipality and work for the drivers, which might be a little different. And technology is changing all the time. A few years ago, it was really important to install lots of level 2 charging stations in public places, and now it seems like maybe fast charging stations are a little more useful. So, if you've invested in one type of charging or port, type of port, then you might be at a disadvantage as things change. Most municipal leaders, I would say, that I've worked with are not EV drivers, so they're not, don't really fully understand the nuances of charging, especially looking at the future and how things are changing. Equipment installation is generally pretty easy to get grant funded in New York State, but they're typically reimbursement grants. So a municipality has to pay up front, and then time's a long time. I'm sure Christine could tell us how long it takes to wait to get repaid, and that can be significant, upfront costs. It's a lot for a small community to front, and that doesn't always count or reflect the annual costs that municipalities have to, or I shouldn't say just municipalities, any EV station owner incurs. These are for networking fees and maintenance fees that are ongoing, annual fees that a lot of municipalities getting into putting in a charging station aren't really factoring that in, for the long term. It gets kind of expensive. Then we have to consider that when EV drivers plug in and pay a fee for their electricity, it also should cover some of those kind of networking maintenance fees, that are applied annually. But in our rural areas, charging stations don't get used that much, and so they're not necessarily generating enough revenue to cover both. And municipal leaders have to come to terms with what they think about charging stations. They're not necessarily revenue generators, or they shouldn't be considered revenue generators. But hopefully, they'd like to break even. Some town board members struggle with taxpayer money being used to subsidize EV drivers, and that becomes a little bit of a heated discussions at board meetings, I think, sometimes. I mentioned the annual networking and maintenance fees, but there's also demand charges, and I think that'll really come true with these fast charging stations, which use they move a lot of electricity, and the utilities charge based on how much kilowatts you're demanding at any one time, and so these fast charging stations, they might not be used that often, but when they are used, they demand a lot, and so that incurs pretty steep demand charges on your electric bill. Maintenance is an issue. I've heard some village and towns talk about frustration in getting the companies that they've contracted to maintain their stations to actually show up and fix them when they are not working. And some are down for long periods of time because of that. Plowing, that can hurt your plow blade can catch a wire and pull a cord, and things get broken, and they just need regular maintenance. So that's I'd say that's all. I sometimes question how much it's appropriate for municipalities to own the stations. It really is very dependent on where you are or which community. I'm thrilled that Indian Lake has put in an EV charging station or a fast charging station because it's really needed. But a lot of charging stations really need to go into private, be promoted by the private sector, and lodging, event venues, those kind of places. So it's a changing world, and we all have to kind of keep on it and stay current with what's going on right now.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. So our next question is for Christine Pouch. Christine, can you talk about the town of Indian Lake's efforts to install a fast charger, the first in the central Adirondacks? What are some of your takeaways from going through the process, and what advice would you have for the small towns or businesses wanting to install them in the future?
That's great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I will preface my presentation by saying we've only had our level 3 chargers for 22 days. So everything is quite new to us. But we did start having the EV conversation back in 2022 when the governor launched some initiatives for drive forward and fast charging. It was at that time that Supervisor Wells wanted to support these initiatives, and we started to move forward. It was a long process. We submitted an application in 2022, and April of 23, we learned that we were approved. However, we never received a final executed contract until December of 2024. The delays obviously were due to COVID at that time. And as part of our grant, we actually included free charging for 2 years. So we'll be learning about those supply and demand charges very quickly once we get our first bill. But we started in January of this year, and it really did move quite quickly. We chose a vendor. We went through New York State DEC, who provided us with the grant to get the proper MWBE qualified vendors, and then we selected it. We sent on our RFP and then selected our vendor. Our vendor of choice is Linkwell, and we chose them because they had a complete turnkey package, starting with installation, permitting, coordinating with National Grid, having the construction people come, people to dig the trenches, all of it. So we really didn't have to do anything as far as the town. They kept me in great contact with timelines, and by July, we started seeing the actual infrastructure build out, the changes to the parking lots, the transformer being put in. We had to upgrade our electrical service. So there was a lot of steps that had to take place before it was actually powered on. But we did power up on October 22nd, and our very first charger came on Friday the 24th. He had a brand new VW bus, and that was all EV, and he was at 20%, and it took him 28 minutes to get to 100%. And he said that he was coming from Saranac Lake, and he rerouted to come to us to charge before he headed to Syracuse. So that is a very similar story that I hear all the time. We've had 10 people charge so far, and the average charge time is 42 minutes. 10 of the 10 drivers, 4 of them are repeat drivers. And the way we know this is because the vendor has a dashboard that monitors the usage, what ports are being used, how much energy is being used. And when I look at those dashboards, there were people that were here for as little as 20 minutes to people here for about an hour. And that has to do with the differences in the makes and the years of the car. Some of the older cars will take a little bit longer to charge, and it's also dependent on the weather too. But some of the things that we learned along the way is the charger itself, the equipment is huge. I mean, I'm used to just the level 2 chargers, and this thing they're like giants compared to those. Our town's Nissan Leaf, which we bought in 2022 as well, it does not have the right adapter for us to actually plug into our own charger. So I would have to purchase an adapter that would cost $870. So I haven't done that yet. I still have my regular plug up at my Parks and Recs building, so I'll continue to charge there. But we did have, like I said, many people were very interested in wanting to know when the chargers were going to be live. They were planning their vacations, their trips here. Some of them were seasonal residents that had EV cars at home that they weren't able to bring up. My neighbor, for example, they live in Connecticut, and she had a Tesla, and you know, she was very excited to learn that she can now bring her car up. So we have a special page on our website, indianlakeadk.com, that talks about the chargers, has the QR code. We also put together a list of other chargers within like a 40-mile radius, because as Nancy said, some of them you may get there and they're not working. So we wanted to check to make sure that the ones that we listed on our website were working. And then we also inquired whether they were for private use or not, because some were at lodging establishments. And the one that was really exciting was Warren Ford in Warrensburg. They have several level 3 chargers, and they hope that people do come and charge there. We also had, I think it was this week, we had a gentleman, he drove up from the Capital Region. He had read our press release in a paper, and he drove up, charged, went and had lunch, walked around town. And that is exactly what we want people to do. We want them to plug in and explore our town. We have many restaurants and businesses within walking distance of the Welcome Center. And I think that's very important when you start planning where you're going to put it. Originally, they had thought they were going to put it by Town Hall and the library, but that's a little off the beaten path. So people really do see it when they drive by. Let's see what else. Advice for other municipalities. I have had no experience at all with EV chargers, only to the fact that I would plug in the EV car. So this whole process was very new to me, very new to our municipality. And we really, having the vendor, Linkwell, they really held our hands through the whole process, and it went pretty smoothly. We only had one little glitch, and that was due to an interdepartmental miscommunication with on the utility side. So that delayed us about a week. But the other part of this whole process is the grant itself, the New York State DEC ZEB infrastructure grant. We wouldn't have been able to fund this project if we didn't have the grant. The other things that made it more possible were also some of the rebates that we received. I have applied and have been approved for a $7,500 rebate from DEC for the EV car that I got. And we also got a $2,000 rebate for the car right at the dealership. And then probably the biggest plus along with the grant is National Grid will give you a make ready kind of rebate for the infrastructure. So as part of the whole cost of the installation, about 152 of that will be a rebate from National Grid. And like our total project cost was close to $240,000. So getting those rebates are very important. We also signed up for, it's a new, it's a EV phase-in plan through National Grid. And as we get our first bill, we'll be able to look to see what the supply and demand charges are. And right now, people are charging during the demand time, so that is more of a cost to us. But this plan should hopefully take the edge off of the higher demand charges in the future. So, but that remains to be seen.
Great, thanks very much.
You're
Next
welcome.
up is Pete Nelson. Pete, you've owned an EV for more than a decade, but they're still rare in New York and the Adirondacks, relatively rare. Only about 2.5% of the vehicle registration statewide are for EVs. Many people feel there are too many barriers to owning one. What has your experience been in regarding to owning an EV in the Adirondacks? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I also echo thanks to the Explorer. I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. I think it's an important conversation. I'll come back to some of the comments that both Nancy and Christine made, but they were very good. And I concur with a lot of them. Before I talk about my experience, just a fun little thing. It's great to be talking about this in the Adirondacks because little known fact, first electric car. It was a small car that presaged streetcars. Was built in 1835, and it directly used technology that was first implemented right here in the Adirondack Park at the Ironville mining operation. It's a remarkable story. So we have our own invested heritage in electric cars, which I think is very cool. When I talk about my experience with electric cars, I often find that there's a fair amount of division immediately, and all I can do is tell you the way it is for me, just daily life. I have 2 electric cars. I don't have a gas car. I don't rent a gas car. I'll never use a gas car again. The situation that I'm in is so superior to owning a gasoline vehicle. It's hard to describe. I drive on average for work 100 to 150 miles a day. Today is a good example. I drove to Ticonderoga. I'll come back to Keene. I have to go to Jay to run an errand, then I have to go to Lake Placid. All of that I can do without worrying for a second about range anxiety. That includes in the winter. I charge at night with a charging level 2 charger that was installed at my house. That's about equivalent to installing a clothes dryer. It's not a terribly difficult thing to do. Going higher than level 2 is a completely different ball game, as you've heard. I plug in at night. I get up, drive my car, plug in at night. I don't stop for gas. I don't get oil changes. I don't have belts, hoses, clamp issues. I almost never have a brake job. My car is far less expensive to operate. It's a really, really good deal. Now, it depends on a number of factors, you know, and there are certainly some things to worry about. But I have 2 cars, as I said. One of them is a Hyundai Ioniq 5. That's about as advantageous a vehicle as you can get. It charges 20% to 80%. When I go to Indian Lake, Christine, I'll be using your chargers. You can bet that in about 16 minutes. You know, very fast. I go get a soda and I'm charged up. I drive the car regularly to places like New York City, Connecticut, Richmond, Virginia. I don't have a problem with any of that. That's daily life. They're great in the winter because they have a low center of gravity. And they're wonderful to drive on hills. Just the level of control with regenerative braking. I don't have anything negative to say. It took me a while to get there. And it took me a while to get there because the technology needed to catch up a little bit. Electric car technology is considerably better than it was even a year ago. And it took a while for the infrastructure to get there. Yeah, and I think it's really important, like something you said at the beginning, I know we'll get into. I'm telling you this as a resident of the Adirondacks. It's a different matter. If I were a visitor, I would be more concerned about locating chargers and making sure that I could drive all the way up here and get the charge that I needed. That said, I'm going to offer a little bit of counterpoint in the discussion. I live on the Route 73 corridor. I am 100 yards from fast chargers installed at the Keene Stewarts. I am 50 yards from level 2 charger the town of Keene installed. That was a project that I led. I am 5 miles from a similar charging infrastructure in Keene Valley. I pass Frontier Town every day and lots of other chargers, and I never see them even close to fully used. The issue of charging infrastructure is important, but it's not why the adoption is slow, right? It's not. In my view, the adoption is slow because people don't know about this technology and they're rightfully concerned about it, even afraid of it. It's stuff that you don't know, and it is a different paradigm. So I am really interested in the state. And of course, I talk to folks in the state. I'm involved in this a little bit. In the state, stepping up to help educate people, give them opportunities to use, learn about, and adapt to a better understanding of EVs so that they can take advantage of all the stuff that I benefit from every single day. I don't have a problem with electric cars. I would never, ever go back. Briefly, to talk about what Nancy said, she's right down the line. I agree with her on everything that she said. Because I've led projects to install chargers and have a pretty good idea of what that's like, the things that she described are all important. And Christine, I applaud you because it's just not easy to get this done. And it needs to be easier. There needs to be a better commitment and investment in the education portion, but also in the actual logistics of how this gets done, so that communities and businesses too that want to install charging infrastructure can do it in a more straightforward way. It is challenging, I think, for businesses much more than it is for people that actually use them. So we're on our way here, but our adoption, I think, is definitely hindered by people not knowing about the technology and having legitimate fears and concerns that could be mitigated if they had an opportunity to learn about it.
Great. Thanks a lot, Pete. Our next question is for Jim McKenna. Jim, you've worked in the Adirondack tourism industry for many years. What are some of the biggest needs for EV drivers who are visiting the Adirondacks? You know, what opportunities exist in the tourism industry in regard to EV owners? Think you're on mute, Jim.
Great panel, Mike. Everybody's had some great points. As far as the tourism industry, I've been out of it for about a year and a half. But anyway, you got me to take a little look at it. And when you look at EVs and the travel industry, you have to recognize that people absolutely make EV drivers absolutely make long distance driving decisions based on the availability, location, and reliability, which I think Nancy mentioned too, of fast chargers. Because we talk about range anxiety. I think, Pete, you mentioned that, or others. That's a true thing, especially if people are going to areas which they aren't familiar with. And when you look at the park, even though we're now fortunate to have Indian Lake online with some fast charging, it's a little sketchy for people to figure it out. The level 2 chargers are fine. And that's if they're staying overnight, as Pete mentioned. If you're going to charge overnight, the level 2 is certainly going to be sufficient and you'll be happy with it. But you don't want to spend charging at a level 2 charger in the middle of the day, because it's going to take you from 4 to 6 to 8 hours or more. But so we have to remember that. And people that drive EVs, they plan it out in advance. So they're not going to be just off the cuff going to go to someplace they're not familiar with without looking at what the realistic ease and convenience is of finding fast charging. So I think that we have to keep in mind. Second thing is, the Adirondacks are a drive destination. There's no doubt about it. Well over 90% of the visitors to the park come via a vehicle. So there's something to think about. What does that mean? Well, that means that, we have to understand that, the EV world is also going to be in that realm. And if we look at EV drivers, we can probably make the assumption pretty accurately that they're probably a little more eco-conscious than the normal consumer. Pete Nelson, for example, a decade in an EV. Why did he do that? Because he was. But so I guess my point on that is that those EV travelers are probably more likely to look at the Adirondacks for a vacation or a visit or whatever, because they're they want to go to that type of destination. Then they look at their planning apps for EVs, and they think it might be a little sketchy. Again, they're going to be looking for DC fast chargers primarily. And even though there's, as Pete said, in Keene, I've driven by that myself, and very little activity, but that's probably because they're charged coming into the park a little bit. But clearly, I've used Keene and also Frontier Town. I know I always have a couple places to stop if I run into some issues, because one of the issues is that I think Peter mentioned, or someone mentioned, maybe it's Nancy or even Christine, is that EVs are great, and they're much greater in warm weather on flat land. You use more energy going up hills, and it's noticeable. And you also use quite a bit more energy in the winter. So people that have EVs that might be winter sports enthusiasts are probably going to be even a little more held back in coming to the Adirondacks in the winter, unless they have that range anxiety free of them. We have maybe a good example of that. We have people coming into the Adirondacks that have phone anxiety. They'll go 20 miles. They're from an urban area. They're 20, 30 miles. They can't get any cell service. So, well, range anxiety is a little further beyond than that, and it's a true thing that people have, and it will hold them back in coming to a destination. I think that's something we have to recognize in the Adirondacks, that we're well positioned to capture more of the EV market because of what our environment is. But when people look at us right now, even though we might not see it as a hassle ourselves, or people that have EVs in the park, it's a little sketchy out there. If you do drive to, the Adirondack destinations as a drive destinations, we usually used to figure that it's a day's drive is our target markets. And when you look at that, you're looking at probably in the vicinity of down to Washington, D.C., Ontario, Quebec, New York, all the Mid-Atlantics, Northeast. There's, according to some of the statistics that I looked at, in that area, there's about 2 million EVs. So there's a market for us. We know they're eco-conscious. We know what the Adirondacks have. Obtaining 1% of them would be, 20,000 EV travelers. So it's something that I think as we look at as things move on, it's gonna, ultimately it'll probably be like gas stations. They'll be there, there'll be no range anxiety. But right now, there is an opportunity if we can work on things to get more, strategically located fast charges. So when somebody in Montreal or somebody in Buffalo, let's go to the Adirondacks, then they look at their app for fast chargers in the Adirondacks and, well, I guess we're going to be limited to 1 or 2 locations is where we're going. But now Indian Lake's there. So that's pretty good. But Nancy mentioned the cost of to the municipalities or the counties in doing that. Certainly is, but there could be an argument built that if we got those 20,000, 1% of the 2 million EV drivers in the market range of the Adirondacks, they stayed for 2 nights, spent $200 a day. They're spending about $10 million, which the counties get about 400,000 in sales tax. I just worked that out, Nancy, since you mentioned that earlier. But I'm just saying there is a way that we can show not only is it valuable for the economy, it can, also produce revenues for our local governments done right and managed properly. Another thing that's good, and I think Indian Lake's a good example, we have to locate these in areas in the hamlets of the Adirondacks, the appropriate locations, strategically 50 miles apart's about where you want to be in DC chargers or fast chargers. And if we can do it in a way that there's amenities that are around these chargers, then we're giving people that are sitting there maybe for only 20 minutes, some an hour, giving them ability to experience these really cool communities we have throughout the park. So I guess my point there is to position well, we should position these charging units in areas and parts of the park where we know there's other amenities and almost in walking distance from those charging units, because that is also a generator of revenue and something people are looking for. We have seen some examples around the country where, regions that invest in EV infrastructure are becoming preferred spots for eco-friendly travelers, no doubt about it. Oregon's got something going EV, they have an EV trail system in Oregon that they're marketing for. Should we market now for EVs? I'm not sure this is the right time until we can tell a better story and make sure that we make this information readily available to people in a real-time basis. I mean, Pete, you've probably run into it, and maybe others on this call, where you've got your fast charger all set. You get there and it's not working. That's like the worst feeling you can have. And that, I think that's getting better at this point, but that's still something that we have to know that people are looking for. So real-time information on our on the fast chargers is going to be an important thing. Other than that, I think that are we positioned for EV travelers? Environment-wise, we're definitely positioned. Are we positioned from a charging point of view? I think there's still a question mark on that, Mike.
Okay, great. So here, we're going to have an open question here for everybody. So we're still in the, as Jim mentioned, in kind of the early stages of building out the EV charging network in the Adirondacks. what steps should we take as a region? Is there a need for a regional strategy to identify where future stations should be placed to help facilitate the process? What are your thoughts about that topic? Pete, you want to
Um,
start?
yeah, I'll jump in because what Jim just said at the end is echoed by John Cerveni, who just sent a comment into hosts and panelists. Reliability is, I agree, one of the most important issues, if not the most important. Jim mentioned that EV owners always plan their trips. I actually don't need to anymore. I don't do that, but I do get disappointed sometimes and look for a backup quickly because reliability is an issue. Reliability, is a vendor specific issue in some regards, is an environmental issue in other regards, but it is not a one-off, and it's way beyond the capacity of a local community or an individual business to address. So it is in itself a tremendous argument for regional strategy, in fact, a statewide strategy, where the state and stakeholders and partners help to impose a set of guidelines and even standards and even regulations and better communication that help us with the reliability issue. Because I think if you talk to a lot of people who drive EVs, whether residents or visitors, they're going to put reliability right at the top. In addition to that, echoing what all three other panelists have said, a regional strategy helps us make a smart decision about where these fast chargers are going to be most effectively located. Amenities are very important. I'm sure Jim knows that Stewart's has had in their business plan for a while to put in fast chargers everywhere they can. They've had some impediments to their plans, but they know that the combination of fast charging and amenities is a business win. So that helps. But even that speaks of a regional strategy that goes beyond Stewart's.
Well, I can speak a little bit about studies. The Adirondack North Country Association worked with consultant Fostera Inc. and the village of Lake Placid to do a EV charging analysis and planning study. It was completed in December 2023, and it was paid for with a NYSERDA grant that was specifically for communities with municipal electric utilities. So it wasn't for every community. It cost $100,000. So if you consider that, these kinds of studies, take some work. That particular study looked at looking to understand regional trends for EV adoption and energy infrastructure deployment, but it also looked at grid capacity of the municipal electric utility and how they could make sure they were ready for it. And Village of Lake Placid was a perfect place to do it. It's a tourist, it's got a very strong tourist economy, and it was very interesting that from when the study was done, like in 2022 and 2023, they expected, based on current, markets, that the 7 times increase of EVs by 2028, just a 5-year period, and that the village would need to increase by 300 chargers within the village, to meet that demand. So it was really interesting. Clearly, tourism and large events kind of drove a lot of that need. I'm also just getting involved in another study that will be happening. It's the Watertown Jefferson County Transportation Council, and they're also undertaking an EV improvement study, and they want to understand where the region is currently in meeting the demand for EV infrastructure, and then also to begin planning for the future. And they're just getting started. They're looking for more participants in their stakeholder input. So if anybody's interested, they can get in touch with me about that. But if to scale something like the Lake Placid study for the entire North Country, it would be very expensive. And there's always the chance that you do all this wonderful work into a study and then it just gets put on a shelf. That's much more common than you would think. Not necessarily with EV studies, but with any study. And so you got to think about that. Is that money the best? Is that the best way to use a chunk of money, and could it go towards installing 10 DC fast chargers in critical areas? Maybe that would be more valuable. So it's tough. It's tough to know. Nobody's saying where they should all be, and everybody then has a roadmap and they just go put them in there. But, and we have to change with the changing needs. So,
You know, you mentioned the CERTA there and coming up with something for the municipalities. First I've heard about that, Nancy. I mean, I look at ideal location, I would think for some level 3 chargers, DC fast chargers would be Tupper Lake. But, you know, they're a muni, they're an electric muni with NYSERDA would not engage. But as you mentioned earlier, there might be other programs, but that, you know, that's a unique place to be. It could be Tupper, Indian. I mean, I think figuring that out on where the best locations are, but Tupper seems like a natural for some DC chargers.
yeah, and Tupper Lake there's been discussions with Tupper Lake. It's, you know, the Evolve program, the New York State Evolve is helping to locate chargers, DC fast chargers every 50 miles or so. And so there's
Yeah.
been discussions here and there, and it just takes time. There's so many more than there were a year or two ago or 5 years ago. And, you know, Tupper Lake probably will have a fast charger at some point. It's just a matter of when.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Christine, did you want to say anything on the topic?
Well, we haven't really had any reliability issues yet. We did have what we suspect is a person decided to stop charging in the middle of the charge and tap the emergency stop button. But we were able to get that turned back on within a matter of minutes. So going forward, I hope that we won't have very many issues, but I have experienced it where I have gone somewhere and they weren't working, or the number of ports that were available were already full. And that's an issue if you just only have 2 ports available. So I'm very glad that we have 4.
So we've talked about visitors a lot, and Pete has talked about the local perspective from EV ownership stance. You know, and it's been established that EV ownership is low here in the Adirondacks. You know, and you know, could we talk more about what are some of the barriers and for Adirondack residents to owning EVs, and you know, how could those barriers be addressed?
I will
Well,
love to jump in on this one right away too, and pick on my friend Jim McKenna, who I almost always agree with on everything, but in this case, not quite. I'm going to reiterate that I think that the main barrier here is people don't know what they don't know about it. They have legitimate fears. When Jim says range anxiety is a real thing, he's right. Of course it is a real thing. Is it a real thing that people ought to sustain because it's actually objectively a problem? Not so much. Not so much. For example, here's the picking on part. Are EVs really good for flat country? Yeah, they're even better for mountainous terrain. I mean, with regenerative braking and the ability to control that car on hillsides, there's nothing like it. I drive the road from Mariah to Elizabethtown, the famous Lincoln Pond Road. Woo, that's a hootenanny in an electric car. I don't worry about range on it. Range loss, range gain, it evens out. Is winter driving a problem? You bet. That is. Particularly the use of climate controls to defrost things or to heat the car. They do hit your range, and it's something that one might need to think about if one has a car with limited range. But gas cars lose even more. People are afraid of this stuff because they don't have a chance to really experience it, which is why I wrote a column for the Explorer urging the state, and you know, pie in the sky, I guess this is, but urging the state to put a regional strategy together where there are cars available for people to try, to rent for pennies on the dollar. There are education sessions. People can use a car overnight or for a week or two. They can try charging out at some sample stations, all of it for free. People need to know what it's like to actually drive these things, and then they can make much more intelligent decisions about what is real and what isn't. You know, the use of charging stations, we're not at capacity. And I've seen some of the comments coming in here. I think that EV drivers who have cars with decent range know that we have enough options if we live here to pretty much get where we need to get. but we need to make sure that everybody understands the details of those issues, and we can't get there without some experience. So I'm hoping, always hoping, that the state will help regions and communities provide opportunities for people to use these cars. Transportation is a huge issue in the Adirondacks. Wouldn't it be great if electric cars could provide an avenue for people who don't have other transportation to get from one place to another? Even a small fleet could change some lives, and it would allow that level of experience to spread.
You know, Pete, adding on to that, regenerative braking is incredible. You know, I get from going from Placid down to the Northway, it's like all downhill, so it's wicked. But you know, I think for local use, I think there is a lack of knowledge and understanding. And you know, if you have an EV and it's personal use, you must have a level 2 charger at home, because you know, you finish your day at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, or 7 o'clock. You can plug in and you're full ready to go in the morning, no questions asked. And the amount of travel that we do, I guess, locally, for the most part, individuals, there's no issue with anything if you have a level 2 home charger, you know. And then you have to, and then just give you a personal example. I travel to Albany a lot. I might go to Syracuse, Buffalo. I know where I'm stopping to charge before I go, and it's the same units I use. It's easy. I'm in, I'm out, and it's, you know, it's just hassle free. And I think that's what we have to get people to understand, is that, as Pete started off, and I'll agree with you on this, I mean, the maintenance costs and the ongoing costs overall are, you know, a lot less than a ICE vehicle, certainly. So, you know, it's a matter of education and understanding, and maybe getting, how do you get people to test them, is what Pete was saying, I think. How do you get them to try them to really understand? Because they are, you know, there's no rolling resistance in these things. When you go downhill, you better make sure there's no troopers at the bottom. For sure, because you're picking up speed all the way down the hill at a big rate.
I would just add a couple things more as an EV driver than as my role with ANCA, and that is, you know, of course, reliability in the charging stations. That's number one. But the ease of using charging stations, they're definitely, you know, I've been driving an EV for 5 years, and the number of apps I have on my phone for turning on this station or that station, and sometimes the app doesn't work, and or you just want to use your credit card to direct payment for the electricity, and you can't. You got to get the app, but then there's not cell service that you can download the app because you haven't heard of that one before. And you know, they're just having some standards, industry standards for payment. Like, get rid of the apps if you can, and just have a credit card that turns the thing on. Would be what I would like to see. Obviously, you know, we're kind of getting towards a standardizing the type of port, you know, whether it goes all through the Tesla port or the NCCS or the stays with CCS, you know, but either way, I think this will happen over time, but that does confuse a lot of people. You know, I've certainly even very recently gotten to a station, and, you know, the screen's kind of broken, and I had to, you know, use my phone to call in to get it to turn on, you know, and it was frustrating. And I've been doing this for years, and I was annoyed. So, you know, that will turn away. You got to remember, like, learning, once you have an EV, you get so comfortable with it, you think, oh, it's no big deal. But that learning curve is steep, and it's really a whole new behavioral change for how to refuel your car. And people are, you know, hesitant to learn something new, especially when it involves their phone, for the certain generation, right? But I think the industry can do better, and I think it is going that way. But that does, you know, you got to break through it. I think the ride and drive events are really wonderful, where people can kick the cars and kick the tires rather, and talk to existing EV drivers, because it really just breaks down that barrier of unknown.
Well, I can echo Nancy for sure. Having a town EV car and being unexperienced that first year was definitely exciting, to say the least. There were many times that I got someplace and the ports were full, and I couldn't charge, and I would be calling my husband or my assistant on the phone on the way home saying, okay, this one isn't working. So I'm in, Tupper Lake right now. I'm going to head to Long Lake and I'll call you when I get there, because I was worried I wasn't going to make it home. And I wanted somebody to know where I was, because I knew my cell phone probably wasn't going to work either. So that is definitely an issue for me. The Nissan Leaf, the charge lid is in the front of the car. And I drove from Indian Lake to Saranac Lake for a conference. It was not snowing, but it was cold. So by the time I got there to plug in, the lid was frozen. Now I carry a heat gun in my car in case that happens, because, I had to wait until it thawed to, potentially plug in. But I think you learn as you go along. I've been in situations where I wasn't able to download the new app. So because the Wi-Fi wasn't good. So I do tend to look where I'm going. And if I need an app in advance, I'm downloading it before I get there. So there are some challenges, but it's a pretty sweet ride. It's for sure.
Does anyone else have anything else on that topic? So we've talked about a lot of issues related to EVs and charging in the last hour. Do you think there should be any kind of local, how should they be addressed locally? Should this be addressed with, I mentioned a strategy before we talked that, but what about in terms of like a committee or something along those lines to kind of look into those issues or provide information about them, guidance? What are your thoughts on that?
I guess I would think, Mike, there would have to be some organization that was park-wide, maybe an existing one to look at it. Maybe it's a task force so that it has like a start and a finish time period. But I don't think it can do any harm. Can it fold into an existing organization that might have a park-wide reach? I don't know. I guess that would be my thought, rather than trying to create something new. Just off the top of my head.
I would probably just echo the same things, who would manage such a committee? Who would be on it? What kind of authority would it have? And, the last thing we need is a committee that ends up spinning its wheels, right? We all have other things to be doing, so we don't want to do something that's not going to have merit and or have an impact. And again, kind of a larger entity will probably need to take ownership of such an initiative. And if it is involved like a study, then we clearly need funding. None of us can do it without money.
One thing we could do, through the, North Country Regional Economic Development Council, they formed, unfortunately, the park is split into 3 state economic regions. But through our North Country regions, we formed what's called the Adirondack Work Group, which includes park representatives from the Mohawk Valley that live in the park and from the Capital Region that live in the park. And maybe it's got to be till next year that can get into their annual report. Not that they would go figure it out, but the necessity for coming up with a bona fide plan for charging stations within the park, at least as an initiative that the state looks at these regional economic development plans as they implement projects for the different regions of the state. So that would not be the group that would plot it all out, but at least it gets some attention, a little different type of attention in Albany by getting it in the regional economic development plan. That doesn't solve the question of where they should be, I guess.
We did have a question from Brian Epstein for our panelists here that I want to throw out before we run out of time. He was curious to hear about people's thoughts about vehicle to grid technology, and it's just a general question. Does anyone have anything they want to say on that topic?
What was it again, Mike?
vehicle to grid technology.
Uh-huh.
I think in terms of, I think what Brian is thinking of is in terms of maybe powering back the grid using EVs.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
I
an
just,
upcoming technology. It's on the way. A lot of our current vehicles don't have, capacity to do that yet. And so I'm watching webinars about, state of Massachusetts and what they're doing with, they call it vehicle to everything now, so it's technology that's still kind of in its infancy, but very likely on the way.
I typed my answer to Brian already. It's a great idea. There's some political challenges to the way that our grid was originally designed, how it's managed, and what can be done. The technology issues aren't that great, but it's a major infrastructure shift.
all right, we have about 2 minutes before we wrap up here. Is there anything else anyone wants to mention before we finish up here? Anything else?
I know we talked a lot about fast charging, and I certainly think that's critical, and we need, more of it in appropriate places. But somebody wrote in the chat about level 2 stations at lodging, and that's I as a driver, like, I wanted to be at the motels where I'm staying in some rural area that I'm visiting. That's, I really look for that, and that's where I stay, or close walking distance to a public one. And the so I don't know if the hotel and motel industry is really promoting charging stations, but they should be, in my mind. And same with it's for tourism, it's the lodging, and it's also any kind of venue, event venue or destination, like Orta having, charging stations at any of the ski areas, or at Van Hovenberg, or, a place where people are going to attend and be there for a little while. Even if they're not charging from 0 to 100 or 20 to 80, they still want to top off so that they can get back to where they came from. So I think we shouldn't forget that that's important as well.
Yeah, I'm in 100% with Nancy on that. That is absolutely correct. Level 2 has an important role in this whole thing, and the good news is it's so much easier to install that and maintain it. It's really a relative piece of cake. So we shouldn't be encouraging businesses to do that. It would be in their interests to have those kinds of chargers when people are going to stay for a while to eat or stay overnight.
Great. I think we're at an hour now, so we're going to wrap up. And I just want to thank all the panelists for taking the time to present today and talk about these issues. And thanks for everybody that's in the audience and attended today. Anyone that's looking to read more about this topic, we've written a number of articles about it on our website. You can find a link in the chat. And you can just go to adirondackexplorer.org to see our future coverage. So, well, thanks very much, everybody, today, and have a wonderful afternoon.